synthesis and application. That is the whole session for today, but this particular session we're going to focus on something that I have titled Synthesis Statements. And synthesis statements, I like this picture. You're going to see this is a funnel. And so ideas go into the funnel and then come out, multiple ideas come out, and then they are synthesized, bringing together one idea. And so this is going to help you better understand all of, to bring everything together in Philemon and in any book of the Bible that you study. So the question is, you answered all your questions for Philemon. Now what do you do with all this information? Because, you could just stand up and put your questions and your observations and your questions up there and say, if you want to teach somebody and say, here's what I did, and these are the questions I asked, and these are the things I answered. That's one way to do it. But what you want to do is, in your mind, you want to be able to put it all together in a concise manner to help you have a good, easy handle on a book of the Bible. So in order to do that, let's review. Observations, point out what you see. What does the text say? Interpretations, point out what does it mean. So what does it say helps you to observe what it says. What does it mean helps you to explain what it says and why it says what it says. Synthesis statements are simply statements that help pull biblical information together in a logical format to help you understand what it states, and why it is stated, and to build a bridge to correct applications. So these statements are going to help you bring it all together, and I've got them broken down into two different types. The summary statement just explains what the section is saying. So if you take a section on your outline, you take a section and you just say, okay, in one sentence, what is happening in this? You don't say why it's being said. You just say what's happening. I'll give you an example here shortly. An argument statement. Think of the word argument. Negative connotations in a lot of our context. You get into an argument with somebody. Oh yeah, well you're this. No, you are. No, that's not the type of argument I'm talking about. This would be in the philosophical sense of argument. When you're taking a position and you are arguing why it is a certain way. Every book of the Bible is making an argument. Every book of the Bible is making an argument, making a plea so that you can understand whatever it is that they're trying to say, and here's the reasons why you need to do it. So it explains why the writer is saying it. Summary statements explain what the section is saying. Argument statements explain why the writer is saying it. It's what versus why. Summary is what, argument is why. And it should be done in one sentence. That's how much you got to boil this thing down to. And they can cover an entire Roman numeral section, so think back to your outlines. I know you've got Roman numeral 1, intro, and you may have that broken into A and B. Okay, you could explain all of Roman numeral 1 and include the A and B in your summary statement and your argument statement. Or you could do the subsections and say, Roman numeral 1 part A, here's what he's saying in this one verse, and here's why he's saying it. And then B, here's what he's saying in these group of verses, and here's why he is saying it. Does that make sense? I'll give you an example here. So this is from my Titus outline. I've got greetings. The greeting is chapter 1, Titus, verses 1 through 4. 1 through 3, if you remember, Paul has this pretty big introduction about himself and his purpose. And then his greeting to Titus, my son in the faith, my child in the faith, and that takes up one verse. Now, there's not a whole lot going on in this section. It's 4 verses. If I wanted to, I could do a summary statement and an argument statement for all of 1 through 4. Or if I wanted to, I could say, forget that. I want to do a summary statement for 1 through 3 and an argument statement for 1 through 3, and then a summary and argument statement for verse 4. You could do that. You can do that. The choice is going to be up to yours. Sometimes a section, or there's so many subsections that it's really hard to boil something down to one sentence. Okay. So here's an example. If I take just the Roman numeral by itself and say I'm just going to group all these verses together and I'm going to do my statements based off of all 4 of these verses, the summary is Paul begins the letter with his greeting to Titus. I'm just telling you what it is. It's not that complicated. Just that's what it is. But here's the argument. Paul uses his greeting to communicate the seriousness of the task that he has for Titus. Paul spends a lot of time saying who he is and who appointed him and what the whole point is of his ministry so that he can tell Titus, and then to say, Titus, you're my child in the faith. He's got a good setup. It sets the tone. It sets the seriousness because he's got to appoint elders in every church. And this is a big deal. If he appoints the wrong people, it's going to fall apart. So he's got to take it seriously, and he's got to know who's telling him and why it's important. Paul has a lot of authority. Paul's job is huge, and his strength comes from God and the gospel. And so Titus has to take it. So that's what the purpose of the argument is, to let you know why. It's one thing to say, well, he's just writing an intro. That by itself doesn't sound very big. I wrote an intro. But the content of what he said, that's where you find the argument. You see, you have to ask yourself in reading that, why is he saying that? What's the purpose of it? Because sometimes he'll do a short introduction, and sometimes he'll do an extended introduction. Paul will sometimes do an extended introduction, and you have to try to figure out why. Why is he taking all this time to say these things? Titus knows him. Does he really? Isn't it redundant for him to say these things to Titus again? Well, you have to find out, why did he? So this takes a lot of thinking on your part. So ask what for the summary, ask why for the argument. The choice is yours whether you want to break it down. We'll go to the next section and check it out. My Roman numeral 2, instructions on appointing elders. I took it from 1:5 to 2:1. And then the purpose for Titus, purpose statement was separate from the qualifications of the elders, and then the difficulties of finding other elders, and here's what I want you to do, Titus. Okay, as far as in response to these things, you also need to be good as well. You need to be tight. But there's a lot of things going here, so I might separate them out. And so if I were to do that and write a summary statement for Titus 1:5, Paul is just explaining why he left Titus on Crete, to appoint elders in every city. That's the what. There's not a whole lot of thinking in that. It's just kind of making sure that you know what was said. And then the argument, Titus needs to understand that multiple elders need to be appointed in each city. He makes a big point of that. I really like it. I apologize. I like it in the Greek. And if it were written in English, the way that it's written in the Greek, he says, in every city, appoint elders. Where, in that sense, you understand that in every city, you're going to have multiple elders in every single city. It can be a little fuzzy in the English, appoint elders in every city. One could say, okay, well, city is singular, elders is plural, but there's multiple cities being referred to, therefore there's one elder in each city. See the difficulty there? Now, one could interpret it that way, but that is not the way that it is written. That is not the intent. Yes?
It would seem that sometimes, though, you're not going to be able to say what the why is behind what the author is saying. For example,
yes.
in Philemon,
okay.
There are sections where it kind of implies that he's wanting Philemon to release Theodosius to come back to Paul, but he doesn't really say that. So you really can't. I've got my own opinion, and I've seen some commentaries say one thing and some say another. So you can't really pinpoint perhaps the why always.
Very good. Excellent point. You can't always pinpoint the why. And you,
what, pretty clearly.
Especially when you have conflicting evidence or conflicting scholars and commentators. What do you do in that situation?
You just say you say that in the argument.
I would say that in the argument.
Yeah.
You could say it appears, as though Paul is wanting him to. And that's a good way to put it, because sometimes it's going to be, you'll be dealing with a section that the why doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and then so you would say, well, there's this section, I'm going to combine it with this section, and I'm going to go ahead and use my why for the totality of it. But sometimes there's a conflict, as you've pointed out. And you're going to come to conflicts in the Bible, and conflict of opinion. And it is on you then to do the due diligence to see if you can get to the bottom of the conflict. I run into this many times as I prepare for our 2GAB class. I ran into it this week, and boy, I knew I was going to run into it, so I've been dealing with it for weeks. I've been reading all these ancient historians, trying to figure out who is Darius the Mede. And these scholars say one thing, these scholars say another. The ancient historians don't even agree. I've got ancient historians fighting with each other. So what I have to come down with is either I'm going to present, well, here's what it could be, or it could be this, or I'm going to take a stance for what I have become convinced of. I want to encourage you to take a stance for something you've become convinced of. However, be careful on how tightly you hold your opinion. If it's something where there is still some doubt, I wouldn't be dogmatic about it and say, it has to be this. Especially if it's something that's not so consequential.
But in my Bible Layman paper, there's a section where I've actually said, I don't know, this is what I think.
That's good.
I think it.
That's fine.
But I'm going to have to wait until I see Paul and Heather to really check it. That's what he meant.
That's a great answer.
I'll ask him.
That's a perfect parachute for everything. Well, what did Paul mean when he did this? That's a great question. When I see him in heaven, I will ask him. And if you're there, we can talk about it then, but then we won't need to.
I have a lot of questions for Paul when we get together.
I think we won't care so much.
I know. I'm like, Jesus, I don't think we care.
Just think we're having coffee or...
Yeah. So here's...
Especially after we've been there a couple thousand years. You know,
By the way,
the news.
when you're right, by the way.
So here's the next subsection. Again, I could put all of these together, and I do put it all together. I'll show you here in a second. The qualifications of an elder. This is where it lists out all what the elder should be like. And Paul gives the qualifications and purpose for the elders that Titus will appoint. He gives them the qualifications. At the end of this section, I believe it's in verse 9, he gives the purpose. So the argument is Titus must use. He has to use these strict qualifications to appoint any elder, since they that's all right. That's a good point. Get the marker. Since they must exhort, and look at this, I'm also putting in here the qualifications and the purpose. What does he do with the qualifications? He uses those to appoint elders. What about the purpose? And why is it important that they are held to such a these high standards? It's because they must exhort sound doctrine and refute those that contradict sound doctrine. That is the function of an elder. So, and that's why the qualifications are so high, so strict. So I can put the summary statement together and this argument statement together, and even I can have a mistake, and I'm not going to take off for your mistakes and typos or printos or anything like that, because the content of what you write is important, and I can tell that I didn't mean to put "and" in there. I was probably revising it. I'm sure it was the word and I started to delete it and I thought of something else. But anyway, the next section is the difficulty of finding elders. That's verses 10 through 16. This is the section where Paul says, hey, here's the deal with the Cretans. Here's your pool of elders. So Paul warns Titus, the summary, Paul warns Titus that the character of many of the Cretans is not in accord with the qualifications.
Old guys rule.
Old guys rule. Oh, Joe's shirt says old guys rule. Happy birthday, Joe, again. Titus, here's the argument. Titus must be incredibly careful to appoint qualified elders since they will be rare on Crete. Yeah, but I got to appoint somebody. There's a couple of good guys. They don't meet every qualification. Oh, they don't? Guess what? They're not going to be an elder. So he's got to be careful. And that's why he's telling him. He's telling him so that you're careful. And then he adds a really nice part, the encouragement to Titus. Paul encourages Titus to also teach sound doctrine. He just got done saying in the last verse that they have to teach, they have to exhort sound doctrine and refute unsound doctrine. And he says in 2:1, and you, Titus, must also teach sound doctrine. So you, Titus, you need to stay strong too. So that's the summary, is that he's supposed to also teach sound doctrine, and Timothy must also ensure that he does not compromise his values in the midst of the Cretans. So he can't pick Cretans that compromise their values to be elders, and he himself, as he's dealing with the Cretans and rubbing shoulders with them, that he does not also compromise his own values, and that he needs to also be qualified and maintain his qualification.
That's supposed to say Titus.
Oh,
See?
he's just doing that to make sure he's awake.
Well, Timothy too. I knew it. I knew I'd written Timothy somewhere. It was nagging me. Thank you.
I didn't say that.
Well, are you saying Timothy shouldn't? Yes. See, everybody makes mistakes. Curtis is leaving. He's like, that's it. I'm not thankful for this anymore. Timothy and an Anne in the middle of a
Credibility's kind of.
falling. I'm thinking.
Exponentially.
All right, instructions on appointing elders. If I want to do the entire Roman numeral, rather than break it out into subsections, you can do this for Philemon if you want. You don't need to come up with 50,000. If you have a bunch of sections, you don't have to do a summary and argument for every single subsection. But you do need to do it for every Roman numeral, at least. And so if you have 5 Roman numerals, then you'll have 5 summary statements and 5 argument statements at a minimum. And I'm perfectly fine with you combining them all. Because check this out. Paul, you saw the summary and argument statements for the first, or for those subsections. This is going to be for the whole section. Paul informs Titus that he is to appoint only qualified elders in every city on Crete. That holds true for the whole section. Titus must not compromise the criteria for the elders that he appoints, nor must he compromise his own values in the midst of these difficult Cretans. So he has to hold to the values that he applies to the people he picks, and he has to hold to the values himself. And so this combined everything, and I'm happy with this, and I'm happy I wrote Titus and not Timothy.
But, people say, call somebody a Cretan, that's kind of a put down. Were they kind of,
Yeah.
historically, they were kind of.
Yes. And we say it to this day, you Cretan. So, in Titus, I want you to spend the rest of this time, go through your own work on Titus, and I just showed you my answers, and I even have it out there. I have it out there on the website so that you can pull and look at my example. Okay, and I have it out there so that you can use it as my example you can use when you're doing your portion on it. But for now, work on Titus. You can work together or in groups, or alone, together or in groups. I'm going to start the day over. Yeah, another sip of coffee would help. Work alone or in groups, and then we're going to talk about what you found out and what some of your summary statements and argument statements that you came up with. Are you clear on what a summary statement is and an argument statement? Fantastic. All right, so, and then do that however you want. If you want to do Roman numerals, do it per Roman numeral. If you want to do it for the subsections, you can do it for each subsection. And go for it.